which is incredibly endearing, and best of all, it has an ad for a game on the back that I am definitely going to talk about in the future someday.
Future's now, old man.
So this video wasn't supposed to come out right after the TAC video, but you know, that one was originally planned to come out in April, and yeah. And with the likely release of the Cosmic Shake being soon, I don't really get to postpone this video if I want it to come out before that happens. Also, this is going to be a two-parter because if there's anything I learned from making that TAC video, talking about 3 games in one vid can take a while. So for this part, it's just going to be BFBB and its remake, which should both be significantly easier to talk about since they're basically the same game with some differences. I've also played both so many times that talking about it is just like being on autopilot. After this video though, the movie game, which I'm honestly more excited to talk about than its predecessor because God knows everyone and their grandmother has already talked about BFBB before. Anyway, are you ready, kids?
1, 2, 3, go! What would this town do without you, SpongeBob?
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say if you're watching this video, you're probably already aware of this game in some capacity, and because of that, it means I have an excuse to skim certain details that otherwise I would find very boring to talk about. You know, stuff like how Mr. Krabs is clearly not voiced by Clancy Brown.
Your treasure chest's looking a bit light, boy. Do you think I've got bilge water on the brain?
Who the fuck are you?
Or that fucking ball puzzle that I actually kinda like, honestly. You know, stuff like that you've likely heard of already if you even slightly know of the game. Although, actually bringing that up, I do want to talk about that one GameSpot review for the remake real quick because that video is so embarrassing and I just find it very funny. I have never seen someone whose job is to review video games fail so hard at a baby game for babies.
In one section of the puzzle, all you need to do is stand on a button, and that button opens a gate for you to bowl a bubble into so you can progress. The only problem is that during SpongeBob's wind-up animation for bowling, he walks forward. That means you fall off of the button, which closes the gate and prevents you from bowling the bubble where you intended, when you intended.
Dude, just step back like a foot and don't hold the button for the bowling ball down that long. It's so easy. I figured this shit out when I was 7. Best part about that review? They gave it a 2 out of 10. I don't know about you, but when a game gets a score that low, my first thought isn't that the game has some issues, no, it's that the game is fucking unplayable. Based on the reaction to the review I saw around the time it was published, I am not the only person who thought that. Thankfully, most of those same people were also able to see through how shallow this critique was. That ball puzzle part is such a weird section of that vid too, because like, there is plenty to complain about here that I'm sure I and many others would find completely reasonable. One of the problems I have with the ball puzzle, specifically in the remake, is that the ball is clearly way lighter than it was in the original game, and with some of the new terrain they added, both can lead to some awkward moments when trying to actually solve the puzzle. But I guess it's more apt to ramble like an insane person about facing your demons while playing a fucking SpongeBob game.
These kinds of gameplay barricades are common and force you to restart and face your demons again and again and again.
There are other baffling takes in that video, but I don't care enough to break them down, so we're just gonna move on now. Also, by now you'd think I'd bring up the plot, but Similarly to the first TAC game, there's not much to talk about. Hell, it's even less important in this game than in TAC. It is straight up a means to an end, just enough motivation to get the player invested to actually play the game. This is basically equivalent to Bowser kidnapping Peach. It's a nothing plot, and that's fine because it's not what I, and clearly the game, care about. I find that the moments between characters, and of course the gameplay, are what really matter to this game, and are the 2 main things that get me to come back to it so often. You see, I have played this game many times throughout my life, and while over time I stopped watching the show, hell, I'm pretty sure the last time I even watched it was a very hot minute ago, I still find myself coming back to Battle for Bikini Bottom all the time, whether it's the original or the remake. You put me in front of a game console with any version of BFBB on it, and I guarantee you I'm gonna have a good time. There's so much I love about this game that I don't even know where to start. God, this video is gonna be such a fucking mess structurally, I can tell. I guess I'll head this off with my least favorite thing, which is the absolutely brain-numbing grinding you have to do to 100% it. Of course, because I'm a lunatic, the only way I play this game now is 100%ing it, which I did for both the original and the remake for this video, concept art galleries included. But for real, this grinding is obnoxious and is like the only thing I really never look forward to when coming back to 100% the game. I hope you like staring at this fucking bridge for like half an hour while you repeatedly kill yourself over and over if you plan to do the same as me. On the upside, you do get to see really cool concept art galleries, even if I do think they cost way too much to unlock. Also, I'm just gonna have my grinding session in the corner of the rest of the video now because I think it'll be funny. Something else I'm not really a huge fan of is the sponge ball. It's not awful for the most part, but when it's bad, it's really bad. Honestly, the worst it gets is in rock bottom, and worst is right because the sections where you need to use it are so bad, I've found ways to completely bypass them entirely. Unfortunately, that trick doesn't work in the remake, but you know, I gotta say that the way they tweaked it makes it way less awkward. One of the major changes is that you can jump while using the ability now, and that really helps with correcting yourself. It's still not great, but at least it's a little bit more usable. Actually, when they build the level design around the SpongeBob's strengths, like its wide turning, it could be kind of fun, and when I get to the movie game, you'll see this thing's real potential. Also, God, the remake is so unpolished. I love it a lot, but man, I can't blame anyone for sticking to the original over it due to the amount of issues this version has. Whether that be very abundant pop-in, bad audio mixing, the fact that it's filled with bugs, or it's just general lack of effects, whether that be particle or sound. Yeah, the remake has issues, I'm never gonna deny that. And now I'm gonna rapid fire some complaints because I wanna get to the good shit already. I don't like that in the remake the wall jumping is super automated, it feels stilted. Knockback is a pain in the ass and it wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't so strong. This one challenge you have to do to get a sock is kinda not fun thanks to the ice physics, it's a little nicer in the remake. And finally, this one button in Kelp Forest is bullshit and I don't blame anyone for not even knowing it existed because holy hell this level is too dark. Also, I'll probably complain about some other things later, but you know. Anyway, on to the good stuff now, and we're actually going to talk about the remake first a little bit, I think. I love how Rehydrated looks. It's the best part about it, bar none. Just gonna turn that down a smidge. Much better. I know how shallow this is gonna sound, but I honestly usually stick to Rehydrated for revisits nowadays, almost entirely because of how pretty it looks. Obviously, that's not the only reason I stick to it, but god, just look at how gorgeous this is. Everything is so vibrant and clean looking, as opposed to the original, which could look really washed out at times. And I don't want to hear anything like, but it replicated the original season's visuals, because besides the texture work and one other thing, no, it really didn't. That one other thing is the character models, by the way. I think besides Rehydrated and the third movie, this is the best Sponge and the gang have looked in 3D. Also, Mrs. Puff looks tweaked out on meth.
Don't ask questions you aren't prepared to handle the answer to.
But the environments in the original, while having a nostalgic charm to me, also kind of just look straight up ugly and often have these weird dark patches that really don't help with that. Of course, there's also just a huge leap in graphical quality between these two games. By the time Rehydrated came out, the original was already nearly 20 years old, and we're inching closer to that actually being reality every day. God, I hate being old. But for real, Rehydrated is fucking amazing to look at. Some of my favorite glow-ups are the robots especially. I loved these dudes as a kid so much, and when we got the reveal of what they'd look like in modern day with these dope redesigns, I was just so hype. I'm almost certain this game is what solidified my love of robots and media, especially when they're all so diamorphically different from one another while also still being clearly the same... what the hell do I call it? A species? They're robots, whatever, you get what I mean. Since I'm already talking about them, I really like the robot viewer in the police station too. You can find out all these dudes' names and read little bios about them, and whenever games do that kind of thing, I always find it so charming. It reminds me a bunch of Luigi's Mansion. Sort of related, I also love the introductions for each of the robots. They're always a treat, even if some of them do show up after you've probably already seen the new robot, but... you know. This robot viewer thing is the main reason I even remember these guys' names. Seriously, I could list most, if not all of them off to you from memory without breaking a sweat because of it. I do wish they had added the bosses to the viewer too. That would have just made it perfect, but hey, what can you do? Back to the graphics, there are a couple of visual tweaks that while I don't think they're bad, I do think they're downgrades. Sleepy Time's not having pupils anymore actually makes them less unsettling to me, which is a shame because I love how creepy these fuckers used to look. The pupil thing is the only thing I don't like about this redesign though. Everything else about it is sick as hell. Also, this dude pisses himself. There's also some weird visual quirks that I chalk up to the game being unfortunately rushed in development, like how Hans barely shows up whereas in the original he would show up every single time you went out of bounds, or how the imagination boxes don't cleanly teleport you or have an animation anymore and instead just have this kind of ugly fade in, fade out thing. But other than that, I've got no other notable complaints on the visuals of Rehydrated, none that wouldn't be nitpicking at least. Well, actually, sort of just one more. I used to think the model for SpongeBob looked weird when they revealed it, but actually seeing it in-game and animated, it looks really nice and I've warmed up to it a bunch. Another one of my favorite things that came around with the new visuals was how they made the bosses, especially the final one, look way creepier. Those bosses are fun as fuck too, whether in the remake or the original. It was unfortunately a trend of the genre at the time for bosses to be kind of an afterthought, but it does not feel that way here. The bosses aren't particularly difficult, but they are super engaging and I think that matters a lot more. It helps with that engagement that both versions of the game have tight as fuck control. Characters stop on a dime and are so precise and it all feels so clean. I love some of the tweaks they made to it in Rehydrated too. Patrick can attack in midair now, which is useful for the obvious reasons, but it actually also makes him better for platforming too, which brings him closer to SpongeBob and Sandy in terms of control. Speaking of Sandy, something I was on the fence about when I first played Rehydrated has become complete adoration the more I played it. I'm talking about the swingin' baby, which feels drastically different to the original, and most importantly is way faster than the original. It was weird getting used to it at first, but man, when you really get the... God damn it, I can't say swing. When you really get the hang of it... Fuck! When you really get the gist of it... Yeah, that works. It feels so smooth. Something else that's smooth? The whole game, baby. I'm talking optimization, and both of these games have it in spades. The original game runs smooth as fuck on original hardware, and the remake looks this good while only being like 8 gigs. Although, even with the optimizations, Rehydrated sometimes still dropped frames, and the fog in Sand Mountain they clearly added to mitigate that just looks fucking disgusting and does not help with spatial awareness. But even then, it's still impressive how well both versions of this game run. Especially with all the NPCs that are just... there. Most of them don't even do anything, they just wander around, but that's still something you didn't see much around this time. The NPCs are also doing a lot of heavy lifting by making the world feel a lot more populated and alive. And this one fish dabs, and I find that very entertaining. The important NPCs also usually have pretty funny and just adorable dialogue at times too.
You okay? You look kinda green.
Fire the lasers! Hurts so much to be helpful! Need hatred soon!
I guess that's as good an excuse as any to talk about the audio and music, and it is noticeably compressed in both games. I would have a problem with this if I didn't find old video game audio compression to be very charming and relaxing. There's this warmth to compressed audio from this era that can't really be replicated easily with modern day audio standards without using like a ribbon microphone, and those are rare to see, very expensive, and incredibly fragile. I'm not much of a music guy, so forgive me if I get like any vernacular wrong in this next part, but Rehydrated's mixing for the music is, I don't want to say bad, but it being mono as opposed to the original stereo mixing is not a great look. If I remember right, and it's been a hot minute since I heard this information, so take this with a small grain of salt, part of why Rehydrated's music is in mono only is because the original stereo tracks were lost to time. Yeah, they cropped up a while later after Rehydrated came out, but what can you do? For what it's worth, they did add some extra instruments to the mixes to spice them up a little, and I like the additions for the most part. I say for the most part because, well, okay, this is gonna sound a little unhinged, but after playing through Rehydrated a couple of times, I started to fucking hate the music for Jellyfish Fields, and I thought I was gonna hate it here too when I replayed the original for this video, but I quickly found that I didn't. After listening to both tracks back to back, I have to assume it's because of the added instruments in Rehydrated's version of the song that were really annoying me for some reason. Look, I'm not a music guy, just give both of them a listen and you tell me what you think. I don't know, man, there's just something about that version for Rehydrated that I find a little obnoxious. Actually, while I'm talking about Jellyfish Fields, I might as well end this part off with the hub and the overall level design. Starting with the hub, it's not entirely accurate to the show, which I'm sure for some insane people is something that actually matters, but it's honestly really fucking cool being able to walk around this place from my childhood. Seriously, it was so cool to me as a kid, and honestly even still today, to be able to go to the Krusty Krab or Rock Bottom from that iconic neighborhood made up of a rock, a Moai statue, and a pineapple. And these levels are so well designed. There are times where the level design can get a bit mean, but for the most part it's very tightly made and meshes really well with the aforementioned smooth as hell control. Speaking of hell, Kelp Forest makes me want to... I want to say this is the worst part of the game, but the grinding I mentioned way earlier is too mind-numbing not to take the cake. That doesn't make this level any better, though. Seriously, I hate how dark this place is in the original, and while that's fixed and Rehydrated, this cave section is unfortunately just as terrible and tedious as it was back then. The amount of times you have to switch between SpongeBob and Patrick is genuinely baffling, and I have to assume this part just wasn't playtested enough. At least the level right after it is really fun. You know, fun. Just like the majority of the rest of the game. Fucking play it already, I can't believe I have to tell you that, you stupid dumbass. Part 2 coming eventually, I guess, I don't know.